to this point. August 23rd, this year, the NLRB ruled in a 3-to-1 vote that student assistants working at private colleges and universities are statutory employees, which implies that now graduate students have the right to form unions. A labor union is an organized association of workers, often in a trade or profession, that's formed to protect and further the rights and interests of the members. The unionization effort here at Duke is led by the SEIU, or the Service Employees International Union, which is a labor union that represents currently roughly 2 million workers in over 100 occupations in this country and Canada. Some unions have represented graduate students in the past, but the SEIU has never represented graduate students before. So the current situation is that last Thursday, November 10th, the SEIU filed a petition to form a union, and the union unit was defined by the SEIU in this petition. So the unit will include all PhD and master's students in Duke University departments housed at Duke's campuses in Durham and Beaufort, North Carolina, who are working towards degrees offered by the Duke Graduate School. Basically, everybody. Some students have expressed a belief that they will be able to exempt themselves from the union after it is formed. This is not correct. So Duke University right now is in discussion with the SEIU and the NLRB to finalize exact parameters of the unit mentioned and the election process and date. Now, the nature of who's part of the unit is not likely to change substantially, but what I've heard is that they're working out some minute details of it. If nothing changes dramatically at this point, the next step will be to vote yes or no on whether or not to have a graduate student union. The original date was set for November 30th. However, at this point, it is not clear whether or not that will be the vote date because the hearing that Duke is involved with has gotten pushed back, and so that is still also up in the air. The election results will be counted as follows. If 51% of the people who vote are in favor of a union, then a union will form. So if you don't vote, then you have absolutely no say. It is not based on the total number of graduate students. So if only 5 graduate students voted, they would be the ones determining whether or not we get a union. After the union forms, then the contract negotiation process begins. So unions or students who are represented by the union will come together and decide on items to include in the working contract. And then the contract will get presented to the university, and there's this negotiation process back and forth between students and the university. So what if we don't like the union? Well, if a contract is agreed upon between the SEIU and Duke, then we have to wait 3 years before we can file for decertification. The process for decertification is similar to the process of forming a union. So you need to collect authorization cards from at least 30% of the represented group. A petition for election would be filed, and then an election will be held to determine whether to decertify the union or not. There have been many attempts in the past by groups of workers to become decertified. One example is the Minnesota home health care workers just this past year in July launched a campaign to try and decertify. And if they are eventually successful, that would be the largest decertification vote in history. But from what I've heard so far, they have not been able to bring that up for a vote yet. So ultimately, data from the NLRB indicates that only 1 in 4 decertification attempts are successful, and only half are put up for a vote. So statistically speaking, if a union forms, it is more likely that it is here to stay, and it is less likely that it would be removed. So why are we, as a group, opposed to a graduate student union? We have several reasons listed here, and we're going to go into more detail on them in the subsequent slides. The first reason is that we believe that every graduate student and every department is unique, and we do not like the idea of grouping us all into a collective lump. We also do not want to lose our freedom to negotiate directly with the administration, and there is a potential for loss of our current professional advocacy groups. Additionally, the freedom of individual departments to organize and fund travel, decide specific parameters of TA positions, organize catered events, so on and so forth, that will likely be limited by the existence of a union. We also think there's a better use of money doing something else because it adds up to a very large amount of money in union dues for those people who decide to pay union dues. Unions historically are not effective for increasing payer healthcare benefits and could increase our taxes. I know this is probably going to be a controversial point, but we will go into a lot more detail on it later. And finally, Duke already has many of the benefits in place that past unions have had to fight for. And so we already have them. What are we going to do besides that? So to address the first point, we're all unique. There are over 70 departments and programs of study here at Duke, and we do not believe it would be good to have the same policies across all departments. There's a huge range. We also do not want umbrella political involvement. So one example of this, the NYU Graduate Union recently voted on whether or not to impose an academic boycott on Israeli institutions. And this was extremely controversial. Among the people who were in the union, there really wasn't a good consensus because everyone has their own political viewpoints, and it ultimately ended up being a big fight. And I will point out that I will use NYU as an example several times throughout this presentation, primarily because they are the best example of a private university with a graduate student union. So there are other graduate student unions in this country, and the majority of them are all at public schools. This is significant because public schools have protections that private schools lack. State laws forbid union involvement in academic matters, and this will apply to state institutions and not to private institutions like Duke. I would also like to make a side note. We noticed that some of our posters had Trump stickers added to them after we put them up. We would like to just point out that our group is here to specifically address the question of a student union, and we're not here to make any political statements about presidential candidates or the president-elect or anyone in the US government. That is not the point. We are not putting up those stickers. All right. So to our second point, we're concerned about the potential for loss of direct negotiation with the Duke administration, potential loss of our advocacy groups, and the fact that union payment will be needed in order to have a voice in the union. So unions are legally required to represent member and non-member employees. There is no, I'm going to be a lone wolf and go off on my own and the union won't cover me. That's not how it works. Exclusive representation is the special coercive privilege given by federal law that empowers union officials to represent all employees in a company's bargaining unit. This compulsory union representation deprives employees, even in the right to work states, of their right to bargain for themselves. And North Carolina is a right to work state. In case you haven't heard that before, what that means is as a person who is working in a place with a union, you can decide whether or not you're going to pay union dues. So if a union formed, it would be the exclusive voice of the university for all students it represents on pay, work hours, and other employment matters. Current avenues of communication, like students sitting on department committees and voting as part of those committees, would be removed, and students would have a lot more difficulty attempting to negotiate directly with the administration. Several of our existing current advocacy groups, you can see them up there, would be in jeopardy. So I want to just clarify one point is that students who opt out of paying fees, they will still be represented by the union, but they will not have a voice in voting on whether or not to accept the union contracts. So if not very many people decide to pay their dues, which may be likely since we have that option and people generally don't like spending money, then there will be a smaller group of students who will be deciding what the contract will be and voting on it. The people who are not going to pay, who decide not to pay union dues are not going to have on-campus representation unless we subsequently change our minds and decide that we want to pay the union dues. This pay to have a voice is the standard operating procedure used by unions in general. And it makes sense because, if you're a big organization, you want your paying membership to be the people who are deciding what the parameters of the deal are. It's unfortunate, though, if you're a person who doesn't want to have to pay, some hundreds number of dollars per year in order to have a voice on your campus. Additionally, we're concerned about the potential for union restrictions and interference with academic aspects of our education. A graduate school-wide labor contract would limit the freedom that departments currently have to organize and fund travel, catered events for their students, and it would also limit departments on deciding the parameters of their TA positions in their department. One example that I found was that NYU TAs are not allowed to lecture in place of a professor. And depending on your point of view, you couldn't see that as a good thing. From what I have personally read, a lot of the graduate students were frustrated by that because they liked having the opportunity every now and then to get practice lecturing. And when the union came in, they lost that ability. All right. Another concern is strikes. Now, this is another topic that lots of people have talked about. Our view goes back to the fact that we do not have the same protections as state universities, where the vast majority of unions have formed. So state law protecting academic institutions from union interference do not apply to Duke as a private university. In November of 2005, NYU held a month-long strike, and they threatened to strike again in 2014 when they felt like the management wasn't sufficiently responding to the union's demands. Now, there has been some talk of, oh, well, don't worry about strikes because we'll just put a no strike clause in the contract. The problem is we don't actually see the contract until we voted on whether or not to have a union. And once we've decided to have a union, you have to pay in order to vote on the contract. So there is no guarantee at this point that we will have an anti-strike clause. And as you can see from NYU, some graduate student unions do decide that they want to have a strike clause and they want to go on strike. Personally, I would not want to be told I had to go on strike. And typically what unions will do is if you choose not to go on strike, they can fine you. We also think there are better ways to use the money. So if we assume that there are 2,000 graduate students who decide to pay their dues, now there are more graduate students than that at Duke, so we're assuming that some students will opt out, then we'll assume that the dues are $300 a year. The range that I have seen is something between $200 to $600. It usually depends on what your stipend is, but let's just pretend $300 a year. That's a lot of money that would be going to the union instead of being free-flowing in the student's bank account to do what they see fit with. Historically, unions are not effective at increasing pay or benefits. So we found an economic analysis that demonstrated that while initially unions can raise stipends by as much as 8% for teaching assistants, this is eventually countered by a corresponding decrease in tuition benefits. So overall, unions do not increase total compensation. We already get paid ahead of inflation here at Duke. Contractual unions are not effective at bargaining for student health benefits, and unions tend to increase the variation in wages among their members. And if you want more information or to look at the details of this analysis, we have this reference here. We're going to be making this PowerPoint available later for everyone. We're also extremely concerned that unions could increase our taxes. So the reclassification of graduate students as employees could result in loss of our current IRS FICA exemption status. We could be required to pay Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes. A quick example here, you take a generic graduate student making $29,000, no dependent standard deduction, and ultimately that's an additional $2,000 every year that they have to pay additionally in taxes if we were to lose our FICA exemption. And this is not even taking into account union dues, which would be additional on top of the taxes. There are some reasons that we oppose this union in particular. A big one is that SEIU has no previous experience representing graduate students. You have probably heard from a union rep if you've talked to them that, oh, well, even though we don't have experience representing grad students, we have represented faculty here. However, the union here that SEIU is involved in with the faculty is 90% humanities faculty. Actually, I think it's a little over 90% humanities faculty. So it's not an adequate representation that would reflect the really diverse group of graduate students that we have at Duke. There have also been various other concerns about the whole campaign. So SEIU does not have the greatest history in terms of all the unions you could pick to join with. It's not a really great option. SEIU has been a very large political entity for many years. Their campaign contributions are significantly larger than those for many famous big spenders like oil companies and tech firms. And it's really a truly enormous organization, so Duke and the money that we see as significant is just going to be like a little drop in the sand for them. They've spent over $200 million in campaign contributions since 1990 and more than $20 million in lobbying since 1998. This is in comparison to ExxonMobil, AT&T, so they spent 10 times as much as ExxonMobil and 3 times as much as AT&T in campaign contributions. This is a really big amount of money we're talking about. And this is money that they got from union members. SEIU has also had more than 870 decertification commissions filed against them. And these can at earliest be filed 3 years after the union forms. So that's a lot of people who waited around 3 years and then filed for decertification. There have been more than 6,000 unfair labor practice allegations against the SEIU regarding the union's duty of fair representation, essentially meaning that a particular union felt like SEIU was not fairly representing them. Many of these allegations have been from university employees, including at Harvard Business School, MIT, MIT Lincoln Labs, Boston University, and WPI. There have been over 580 allegations of coercive and threatening statements / harassment. And then also a lot of past convictions of union leaders that are really sketchy overall. Some additional issues. Number one, SEIU will not give us a charter for our own particular branch as Duke students, so we're not going to be able to elect our own officers or decide how to spend our dues. If we did have the opportunity to have our own distinct charter, then we would have more individual say, but that's really not how SEIU works. Furthermore, they have the constitutional authority to merge us with other workers as they see fit. So you can look at their constitution. So they currently represent a lot of service employees that have working conditions very different from graduate students. An example, adjunct faculty at Northeastern make up only 7% of their local, which is mostly composed of healthcare workers. So the faculty are just lumped in the same bucket as healthcare workers. SEIU has also been found guilty in the past of misleading individuals about an authorization card before people sign one. Duke's actually currently investigating this regarding the campaign that's taken place on this campus. And SEIU has the constitutional authority to tax us to pay for their political operations, which, as you saw from the previous discussion, is a lot of money they put into political operations. They spend overall 37% of their gross income on representation activities, which are largely supporting unions trying to form. So that's hotels, airfare, supplies, so on and so forth, for the union employees who come to a specific campus to encourage people to form a union. And I'm sure many of you have met the paid employees who are often stationed at different places. They also spend 18% of their gross income on lobbying and political activities, which also gives you a little bit of a sense of the scale of this organization, because 18% is not a lot of their income, but they spend a lot on political stuff. Our final reason is that we are pleased with Duke, and Duke already offers many of the benefits that past students had to fight for. You can see the stipend breakdown up here, and you can also see it's way above the poverty line. I've heard things floating around like, oh, you know, graduate students, we're all living in poverty, blah, blah, blah. We're not living in poverty. Duke also has given 2 to 3% raises in the past and has projected to give 2% raises in stipends over the next 2 academic years. So you can go online and actually look this up. They have big tables showing these are the past stipends, these are the plans for the future stipends, et cetera, all the numbers up there. Over the past 7 years, grad students have seen a 12.4% raise. So Duke does increase our stipends. This stipend also goes a particularly long way in Durham. So graduate student stipends don't vary hugely across this country, and the cost of living where we are means that our stipend can be used for a lot. So we are in this little bar at the very far end here. I don't know if you can read all these other cities, but these are cities with a lot of comparable institutions, and we have a much better cost of living. Furthermore, we have many additional benefits besides our stipend that I think we often don't have pointed out to us. So we get health insurance plus a medical expense assistance program. We get great childbirth and adoption accommodations. So 7 weeks of paid time off plus $5,000 for childcare. And I will point out that this is in contrast to only $900 at the University of Washington, which is a unionized school that had to fight to get $900. We have $5,000. We also get lots of opportunities for professional development, short-term loans, the ombudsperson, who can provide free legal advice. So there's been additional pointing out that, oh, you know, we have no opportunities to talk to someone who knows things about the law. We do. This is the ombudsperson. So if you have concerns about, you know, legal matters, you can ask their opinion. Many state-of-the-art facilities around our campus, and a Duke University degree, which means a lot and will serve us for the rest of our lives. So in conclusion, we have numerous reasons that we're opposed to a grad student union in general. We have numerous reasons that we're opposed to the particular choice of a union. We don't like the SEIU, and we really appreciate Duke, and we feel they have excellent support for their students. How can we prevent the union from forming? Vote no. Everyone will have the opportunity to vote. Do not let your voice go unheard. Everyone has an opinion. opinion about this. If you don't have an opinion about it, or you know someone who doesn't have an opinion about it, then I would encourage you to educate yourself as much as possible about what this would mean, because it's going to affect everybody. And if you have signed an authorization card that you didn't know very much at the time that you signed it, or you subsequently change your mind, you can not only withdraw that card, but you can still vote against the union. So that card does not bind you in any way. Every vote counts, and we'd like to thank you all for coming.